I mean, like, I guess if you take Miss Israel and you watch her when she's really angry, I don't think she looks as pretty as she would look once she becomes Miss Israel. Anyway, so that kind of idea. So therefore, patience is associated with beauty. And then in ethical conduct, it's associated with a good smell. So they say as a result of ethical conduct, you smell good. So what is very interesting, have you ever heard the story of His Holiness? His Holiness the Dalai Lama apparently has a very, very special smell. And I've heard from, I used to, when I first started learning Tibetan, I had an exchange class with a young Tibetan man who had just come from Tibet, and his uncle was a bodyguard of His Holiness, so he told me the story. So he said that the bodyguards, when His Holiness has gone all day long, back and forth, you know, he's been running around, seeing people, etc., and he puts his shoes in front of his room, the bodyguards take his shoes and have a sniff. Normally it's a very special smell. His Holiness has a very special smell, and the best place to sniff it is in his shoes. So they all take a sniff. I don't know. I never sniffed His Holiness's shoes. But Lama Zopa Rinpoche, one time, he gave a teaching, and afterwards I was supposed to come down, so I did, and he had to go to the bathroom really, really quickly. And his attendant took his ritual robe, like the chogo, like what you wear, the yellow, saffron colored. He took it and he basically threw it on top of me. So I went like, smelled. I mean, it just smelled clean. It smelled very fresh and clean. Right? And then I folded it together and put it somewhere. But I had the time to sniff, so I kind of threw it on top of me, and it was like a little bit on my face. So I took a good sniff. And then when someone passes away, a High Lama, just when they're in that meditative state, sometimes you've heard of this, the kind of tutam, or like staying in the clear light, they say the very good smell, like there's a fresh smell coming from the body. Like, you know, when someone like me dies, oh, I just want to leave the room because I start decaying right away, so it's just like rotten flesh kind of smell. But when the lamas die, you know, like when their body doesn't decompose in their meditation, it emanates. So that is said to be the pure smell of their what's it called? Of their ethical conduct. Yeah, so there's definitely, I don't think I've ever smelled a lama who smelled bad. I don't think so. I don't think they're always necessarily showering every day. And I don't think I've ever smelled, in general, Tibetans don't really have a bad smell, unless they really don't shower forever. So that also happens. It was worse in the winter. Like with my classmates, and here I'm not talking about the lamas, I'm talking about ordinary, you know, nuns in this case. So in the summer it was always easier because everyone had showers all the time because it's hot. But in the winter, when everyone stands together to listen to a debate, and sometimes you go, wait a minute, I need to get away. So it was just sometimes, you know, a little strong, interesting smell. But in general, there's not like a strong body odor, actually. I've never really noticed that. Anyway, but it's associated.
Once I was in His Holiness' bedroom in Narganda.
Oh, you were in His Holiness' bedroom?
After he left, they invited us to go in. We had been about 7 people. Okay. And I was smelling, I wanted to lay on it to feel the energy, but only went few Tibetan people and went around and we smelled the bed. The room was wonderful. It was celebration.
How did this smell? How was it smell? Sniffed?
Something very different.
Very different.
In the room also, the atmosphere was
very different. Very pure, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I wished I could smell the feet. You know, maybe like when someone's come by, you kind of throw yourself on the ground and take a big sniff or something. They take you away or something. Like, what's wrong with that person? No, I'm kidding. But yeah. Anyway, never mind. So, but this is like pure moral conduct is associated with a specific smell, like a fresh smell, I guess. I don't know. That's one of the advantages. So, if you want to spend less money on soaps, good reason to. Okay. Others respect you, benefit you. So there are a lot of benefits. Just everything goes easier. You accumulate a lot of merit. I mean, again, they said that merit is one of the most important things, to accumulate a lot of merit. Most important things for Dharma practice, like the capital. If you want to work with money, you need capital. If you want to work with your mind, you need merit. Okay. The disadvantages are feeling unsettled, having fear, negative rebirth. I mean, such a whole, I mean, ethical discipline includes so much, unethical discipline includes so much. So again, there's a whole variety of advantages and disadvantages just for the sake of being motivated. And usually we blame external problems, external factors for our problems, but really our problems are the results of harmful actions, right? It comes down to harmful actions, which of course in turn are the result of the afflictions, which go back to the misperception of reality. Okay, so therefore charity others is one of the most powerful antidotes to engaging in non-ethical conduct. Okay, so for this, vows are not really necessary, but vows are said to be a good technique. Taking vows is said to be psychologically effective because it protects you. You know what the example or the analogy they use for vows? Do you know what the analogy is usually that's used for vows? They're like fences, like a fence of protection. Here, in this case, it's the mind. You want to protect your mind. So those vows, they serve as fences. And there are vows which are vows that prohibit a naturally negative action. But there are also vows which prohibit an action such that is not naturally negative, but it becomes negative if you go against the vow. So these are, you're prohibited from doing certain actions that if you hadn't taken the vow, engaging in them are not in themselves negative, but they could prevent you from keeping the naturally, or from refraining from engaging in those naturally negative things. Can you think of an example of something that you take a vow of refraining from something, actually doing this action without the vow is not negative?
For a nun or a monk it's easy. For example, sex.
Yeah, exactly. All right, something else.
For a layperson, I have to think.
For a layperson? Okay, is there a vow you can think of that you take as a layperson, which in itself is not bad to do this? Yeah, intoxicants. Drinking alcohol is not in naturally negative, but of course the story that is told, the story is told in different ways. I know Jetsuma tells the story in one way, you can read this in her book, but the story as I know it is that a woman comes to a hermit who's a monk and says, look, I got a goat here, I got some alcohol, and there's me. So please, either you have sex with me, you kill the goat, or you drink alcohol. One of those three things you have to do, otherwise, you know, I'm going to kill myself. And he's like, what am I going to do? I can't kill the goat. That would be against my vow of not killing. I can't have sex with her. Again, that would be against my vow of celibacy. Okay, so the least problem is to drink the alcohol. So he agrees to drinking the alcohol, and once he's drunk, he kills the goat and he has sex with her. So, therefore, the idea is that kind of exemplifies, or that illustrates the need for refraining from alcohol, because that may not, but you know, sometimes we do things in an intoxicated, with an intoxicated state of mind we would never do when we're not drunk. We just don't know what we're doing. So therefore, alcohol or not being intoxicated. So people ask me about this sometimes, about intoxication. But it doesn't mean like if you take certain medication that has strong side effects. If you're still allowed to drive, I think that's a good way of a good measure. Because if you take something and as a result of that you're legally no longer allowed to drive, that would qualify as something intoxicating, like an intoxicating kind of drug. Well, it doesn't mean that if you're still allowed to drive, nonetheless, you should do it. But if you're no longer allowed to drive, then I think you're pretty safe to say this is not something you should do. So certain medication, if you have side effects, yes, but you don't know what you're doing any longer. I mean, you feel much freer to do certain things. If you don't have that side effect, I don't think it's a problem to take those medications, right? And of course, with the intoxication, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has said that you can have some alcohol sometimes, if it's for social reasons, if at the time of Shabbat, though, you can actually take some You can take grape juice. I've just found out. So there's no excuse. It's not like you have to. It's called the kiddush. To do the kiddush, yeah. Kiddush, not kiddush. Kiddush. Okay. So anyway, just memorize that word. It's not the word then. So anyway, so in order to do that, you can actually take grape juice. So then there's no reason. But sometimes on social, maybe you have to drink it. So it's hot. Yeah, and it's hot, and you just take but then you visualize it's something else. Actually, that's also another example. But of course, it's transformed into nectar. So really, you're not really strictly speaking drinking alcohol, though. It depends on how strong your visualization. Well, actually, Nyingma, they're not allowed to drink. I mean, it's like, I don't know whether I should say that, but sometimes people, they use the Nyingma tradition, like in Tibet. I tell you, one of my classmates, he says there's a saying, and it's really negative. It's really like degrading, degrading the Nyingma tradition, which is not okay. But they say, oh, either you're a monk or you're a Nyingma monk. So to be a Nyingma monk means you can have a girlfriend. But actually that's not true. In the Nyingma tradition, you cannot be a monk and have a girlfriend. I mean, that is totally, that's not, but they say that because in the Nyingma tradition you have lamas who are no longer ordained, but they still wear maroon. So for some people with an untrained eye, they're unable to see whether they're wearing robes or not. They actually look different. If you know how these robes, what they look like, and you can see from the stitches whether they're actually monks or not. So they can be confusing, but they're actually not breaking any vows. So they also don't have the vow not to drink. I mean, moreover, when they're highly accomplished, they can drink alcohol and it becomes part of their practice. It's part of their practice. So they're not really, strictly speaking, breaking their vow. Anyway, so going back to this here, so how to begin the practice of ethical discipline, to understand the negative sides of not doing so and the positive sides of doing so. Okay. And taking vows can serve as a protection, as we've just heard. Oh, and as I also wanted to mention, if you don't want to take vows, there is said to be an incredible virtue in taking vows. Just the fact that you've made that commitment is virtuous in itself and psychologically effective. But if you don't want to take vows your entire life, there are other ways of dealing with it. One way would be to take the one-day vows. So they're one-day pratimoksha vows, which are the same vows as the Mahayana precepts, except the motivation is different. So if you want to follow the Mahayana tradition, you take the Mahayana precepts, which are actually a type of vow, a one-day vow, combined or conjoined with the Mahayana motivation. And then what you could also do, if you still don't want to take vows, you can make a promise. Today I will refrain from killing. I will not engage in the act of killing. Or tonight, if you're a butcher or something and you have to kill throughout the day, there's still some virtue to make the promise. Of course, you're not going to kill while you're sleeping, but there's a virtue in refraining from killing, to actually make that active promise in and itself is virtuous. So one can take that vow at the times when one knows one will not engage in the negativity. So I think that's beautiful. If for whatever reason there's certain vows you cannot take, then you could at least make a promise during the time that you're sure you're not going to engage in that. Right? That's beautiful. So there's still great virtue that can be accumulated. Okay. And then Shantideva, in the context of ethical discipline, he said it is best to attentively guard the mind. That is the ethical discipline of guarding all conduct. So I thought it was very beautiful how he said basically to engage in ethical conduct is guarding the mind. Yeah? So as I mentioned yesterday, there's mindfulness, introspection, and attentiveness. So those three mental factors will help us to be more ethical, to guard the mind. So mindfulness, what am I doing right now? Be aware what my thoughts are, what am I thinking, what kind of mental karma am I creating? If necessary, to also be aware of our speech when talking. It's so easy to just talk, to be carried away, but always watch the mind. What am I thinking while I'm speaking? What am I thinking? So our speech becomes becomes more mindful. We are aware of the other person's feelings, of not engaging in senseless gossip, etc. So to be mindful, attentiveness needs to be there. So not just to keep being mindful, we need to have attention, but also introspection. Yeah, mindful means to be aware of what we're doing, but there needs to be introspection because you're looking at what internally am I thinking. So those are 3 mental factors which we should generate, which Solinus has on several occasions mentioned. We need mindfulness, introspection, and attentiveness. Okay. So, and then there you have right away, it goes into the categories of ethical discipline. The ethical discipline of gathering virtue, the ethical discipline the ethical discipline of restraint, the ethical discipline of gathering virtue, and the ethical discipline of acting for the welfare of living beings. Okay. So restraint, I've already mentioned. On the most basic level, it remains to refrain from non-virtuous actions. So in the beginning, this is seen as most important, to start our practice with that. So the latter 2 types are actually subsets. Gathering virtue and working for the benefit of others. They're subsets because without the first one serves as the foundation. You can't have the other 2. You can't accumulate virtue and work for the benefit of others if you don't really have a firm foundation in the other one. I mean, it'd be contradictory. You harm people, but then you also accumulate virtue, then your virtue is not pure. So therefore the first one is really the basis of the other one. If the first one degenerates, the other do too. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, according to taking the Pratimoksha vows here is mentioned. So those are common to the Theravada and the Mahayana. So therefore, refraining from the first 2, the ethical disciplines of gathering virtue and the ethical discipline of gathering of restraint, they are common to Theravada and Mahayana. And then depending on the 3rd type, whether you think you think of it from the point of view of benefiting sentient beings in general, that is also common to the Theravada. But of course, then there's the Mahayana level of working for the benefit of all sentient beings by wanting to become enlightened. And as I said early on, there are actually 2 types of negative actions to refrain from: those that are naturally wrong, and those that are prohibited because of certain vows we've taken. So unless we've taken the vows, they're not prohibited. But it's still good to refrain from them, so it's not natural in and of themselves, but they can become negative. Right? Does that make sense? So with the alcohol, even if we haven't taken the vow of not drinking alcohol, it's still good to refrain from getting drunk, because that potentially could lead us to accumulate non-virtue. And there are other vows, for example, for monks and nuns, not eating in the evening. Not eating in the evening is said to also be something that is not naturally negative, but once you've taken the vow, if you're in contradiction to that, you accumulate a negativity only because you've taken the vow. Not wearing jewelry, not wearing perfume. Again, that's also one of them. No, it's not like alcohol, that if you eat in the evening, you're more likely to kill other people or something. No. It is, the reason, what I'm saying is that there are negative actions. If I've taken the vow and I break certain vows, such as my vows as a novice, one of my novice vows is not to eat in the evening. If I do eat in the evening, I break that vow. Okay? So, therefore, the reason we shouldn't eat in the evening, well, it goes back to, of course, India, when most of the Buddhists at the time, they lived in central India, where it was very hot throughout the day. I mean, well, there were several reasons for not eating in the evening. And one reason is that you're just heavier. A lot of the monks and nuns at the time of the Buddha lived in a kind of semi-retreat, in a kind of retreat setting, in like forest monasteries. So they were doing a lot of meditation, spent a lot of times during the day they went begging, and then they would spend a lot of the time contemplating, and so that was seen as an obstacle to their practice if they'd eaten in the evening. But also, you know, in India, if you go begging in the morning, you don't have a fridge, you don't want to eat the food in the evening, right? Yeah, the freshness of the food, exactly. So it makes also sense hygienically that if you get certain food in the morning, it's very, very hot throughout the day, you eat it before noon and not afterwards.
I heard another reason, I don't know if it's true, that in India people thought it was very important for them to give some food to the nuns and monks, and they were poor. So twice a day was too difficult for them. They complained to the Buddha.
Ah, okay. Well, okay, so they couldn't do it twice a day, so that would make sense that you only go. But also monks and nuns are not, I mean, how much time do you spend begging? That's actually, it takes some time. I mean, you do spend every day going around, arms round, depending on where you live, you may have to walk a long distance. And so, yeah, maybe some people complained about that. Possible, I mean, in some areas, it could be that they didn't have enough money. But the main reason I've heard is that you just feel, you know, lighter, you feel like, and it just depends. I mean, you can do it, you could try it, and some people feel it works really well for them, and other people feel it doesn't work well for them. So usually it's advised that after you become ordained, that at least for some time you should try and keep the vow. But if you study, for example, and you debate, a lot of physical activity, it can be very hard and it's not recommended. If you feel like you lose too much weight and you get weak or you don't sleep well, then it's not recommended. So it depends on the person. So there's definitely good reason. But I'm saying if you break the vow just for like, you know, I haven't even tried it and I don't care, I'm just going to do it, then that's seen as negative.
The Dalai Lama said that sometimes in the evening he eats biscuit.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, exactly. No, especially with His Holiness, someone like busy like him, I think if you don't eat after 12, that's a long time, you know, and you may not be able, you know, you need to, I mean, His Holiness is just manifesting this, but is showing us that at least a little bit, so at night you sleep better and yeah, you don't lose too much weight. So yes, so a light meal is recommended if you eat. Okay. So anyway, Shantideva, he advises with regard to ethical discipline. He says we should be with our mind, we should regard our mind like an open, painful wound. You know, like when you have a wound that is like open and you go in a crowd of people, like an unruly crowd of people. How do you move around? Very careful, so that no one bumps into you. So that sense we should have with our mind being with other people. It's beautiful, isn't it? So he says, just as I would be attentive and careful of a wound when amidst a bustling, uncontrolled crowd, so I should always guard the wound of my mind when dwelling among harmful people, or people in general, I think. Dwelling among harmful people, he says, but I think it's true for always being in a group of people. Our mind is we need to pay a lot more attention as opposed to being on our own. So I like this example of thinking of the mind like a wound. It's very sensitive. Okay. Now, with regard to the ethical discipline of, so this is the ethical discipline of restraint. So to be mindful, introspective, and attentive. Right? I think it's pretty straightforward. It's already been explained in the context of karma, refraining from the 10 non-virtues. Do you have any question with regard to restraining from the ethical conduct of restraint? Any questions? No. Okay. So then the ethical discipline of gathering virtue, the next one. Okay. So it's more seen from a positive kind of aspect, like instead of negating, refraining from something, to actively accumulate something. And it also, in a way, incorporates the desire to benefit others. So the third one is incorporated in that. But it doesn't always mean benefiting others. It could just be virtue for the sake of virtue. That would also be part of the ethical discipline of gathering virtue. So any action that accumulates virtue refers to that. So this is how we can also make sense of the other paramitas, or the practice of the other paramitas, being also in a way an ethical conduct, because the moment you accumulate virtue, well, then being patient, that is virtues. Again, you accumulate virtuous karma. Being generous, you do that. So anything else is also, at least you refrain from negativities in that moment, but you actively accumulate merit. Therefore, it's ethical conduct. Makes sense, doesn't it? Okay. So you safeguard your mind, and you particularly work for virtue. And again, the rule is to being able to forsake short-term happiness for long-term happiness. So gathering virtue can mean to experience hardships. Now, how to deal with hardships, we go, when we speak about morality, we'll speak about that. But in particular here is being virtues, may mean that, or gathering virtue in particular, may mean that we have to forsake short-term happiness for long-term benefits. So some discomfort, for example, doing prostrations. Come on, how comfortable is that? Doing certain activities such as full prostrations, or I don't know, any kind of sitting for long periods of time, meditating, all that is associated with some kind of discomfort. So short-term discomfort, long-term benefit. And then lastly, there's the ethical discipline of acting for the welfare of living beings. Okay? So, based on the first two types of ethical discipline, so they really serve as the basis. If we have habituated ourselves to engaging in virtues, in refraining from negative actions, and if we can do that, we can. So first we start with that, and once we're able to restrain ourselves, we can take it a little further, engage in positive actions, and once we're able to do that, then we can actively work for the welfare of the sentient beings with the Mahayana motivation. Okay. So, who are the sentient beings we should work towards? Well, there's a whole list giving in this particular case. Lama Tsongkhapa gives a list of 11. Sentient beings who need immediate and direct help. Sentient beings who do not know how to achieve what they desire. How many people are there, right? Who want certain things but do the opposite of what's good for them. Sentient beings who need material or spiritual assistance. Sentient beings who are in fear. Sentient beings who are in misery. Sentient beings who are in poverty. Sentient beings who need some place to stay when traveling. Okay, that's a little outdated. The hotels.
Oh, couch surfing.
Pardon?
Couch surfing.
Huh?
Couch surfing.
Alle couch surfing. Couch surfing.
This is it, no?
Yes.
Well, you're the surfboard. It's your couch that you offer to people.
No, you can. Yeah.
There's a website.
There. Oh, really?
Yeah, you don't know?
No. Never heard of
There's
that.
an international group of people that you can go to Berlin, and if you don't have an hotel, you can't afford it, you ask people to go and sleep in their houses.
Couch surfing.
Or in Israel, Tel Aviv, whatever.
But you have to be the one who offers us. This is Okay, so you would allow people, but them. I mean, yeah. So usually they're not like terribly miserable people, but like people who need possibly. I mean, that could maybe also include those who are homeless. Like on a very cold day, if you would be able to, if it's not your own home, but enable them, maybe pay for their accommodation. I don't know where I read this. There was a Syrian family who basically landed out on the street. And when people heard about their plight, they started sponsoring hotel rooms for them. So one person gave them a month, and then to enable them to be actually, I don't know, they had gone through some trauma, I forget all the details, and something terrible happened to them. And then somehow they were on the street and they were like totally desperate. And when people heard it, they sponsored that. I thought that was very beautiful. And once people heard about it, they were like, oh, we need to help them. And then people paid money again and again, and they were able to live in a hotel with some comfort. Of course, it's only a temporary solution, but it could make a huge difference for the time being. So sentient beings who want friends or agreeable companions. sentient beings who desire to enter the practices that leads to nirvana or enlightenment, sentient beings who are on a wrong path and need help to reverse direction, and sentient beings who need extraordinary miraculous help. Okay, anyway, actually it's all sentient beings. Right? There's really no one